Welcome to News Beacon, your trusted source for breaking headlines, global insights, and sharp analysis from around the world. If you're new here, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss an update. The ground beneath one of America's most contentious debates has just shifted. In a moment that will be studied for generations, the Supreme Court has delivered a decision that will echo through every corner of the nation. In a landmark ruling, the Supreme Court has redefined the boundaries of the Second Amendment, reshaping the legal landscape around gun rights and regulation in the United States. This decision lands in a nation already deeply divided over firearm ownership, public safety, and the meaning of liberty. Across the country, Americans are grappling with questions about how to balance individual rights with collective security. The ruling is more than a legal opinion. It challenges existing laws and forces lawmakers to rethink strategies. Legislators at every level, from city councils to Congress, must now reconsider how they approach gun policy in light of this sweeping decision. At its core, the decision dramatically expands what the Second Amendment protects, extending constitutional protection to firearms previously in a legal gray area. This means that weapons once subject to regulation may now be shielded by the Constitution, raising new questions about what limits, if any, can be imposed. The court sets a much higher bar for any law restricting access to certain weapons, signaling a new chapter in the history of gun rights. Legal experts predict a wave of challenges to existing gun laws, as courts across the country interpret this new standard. This is the culmination of a decades-long strategy by gun rights advocates to solidify the Second Amendment as an individual right. Their efforts, from grassroots organizing to high-profile court cases, have now reshaped the national conversation. Building on the Bruin ruling, the court now applies the historical test with unprecedented force, limiting government regulation. The majority opinion argues that only regulations consistent with the nation's historical tradition are permissible, a standard that could invalidate many modern laws. For supporters of stricter gun laws, it's a setback. Many fear this will make it harder to address gun violence and protect communities. They worry that the decision could undermine years of progress in public safety. For gun rights advocates, a historic victory. They see this as a validation of their belief in the fundamental right to bear arms and a triumph for constitutional freedoms. The debate is far from settled. This decision has ignited a new, more intense phase of the conflict. As both sides mobilize for the battles ahead, the nation stands at a crossroads, facing profound questions about rights, safety, and the future of American law. The Supreme Court's recent decision has ignited a national conversation, centering on a powerful and controversial question. Are modern, widely owned firearms like the AR-15 protected by the Second Amendment? After careful consideration, the court's answer was clear: yes, they are. This ruling has sent shockwaves through the legal and political landscape, as it directly addresses the types of firearms that have become symbols of both personal freedom and public debate in America. The court declared that the Second Amendment's protections are not frozen in time, limited only to muskets or flintlocks from the 18th century. Instead, it extends to firearms that are in common use today by law-abiding citizens for lawful purposes such as self-defense, sport, and recreation. This interpretation recognizes the evolving nature of technology and society, ensuring that constitutional rights remain relevant in the modern era. The so-called common use test has now become the new legal standard. This test dismantles many of the arguments that have been used to justify bans on so-called assault weapons, shifting the burden onto those who would restrict access to popular firearms. The court's decision signals a significant change in how gun laws will be evaluated moving forward. This ruling builds on and clarifies the legal framework established by the 2022 Bruin decision. Now, if a firearm is commonly owned and used by Americans today, it is protected under the Constitution. The court emphasized that the right to keep and bear arms is not a relic of the past, but a living right that adapts to the present. As a result, it has become extremely difficult, if not nearly impossible, for states or the federal government to ban entire classes of firearms that are popular and widely owned. Lawmakers must now contend with a much higher legal bar when attempting to restrict access to these weapons. Legislators can no longer justify bans simply by labeling a weapon as too dangerous or military style. The court's decision means that popularity and lawful use are now the key factors, not subjective assessments of danger or appearance. In a striking analogy, the court compared banning the most popular rifle in America to banning the most widely read book. Both would be a direct affront to the fundamental rights enshrined in the Constitution. This comparison underscores the seriousness with which the court views the protection of individual liberties. The decision effectively ends the previous balancing act between public safety concerns and gun rights. Now, only historical tradition and the current common use of a firearm matter in determining its constitutional protection. This marks a dramatic shift in the legal landscape, prioritizing individual rights over government regulation. Without a clear historical precedent for banning a widely owned firearm, such bans are now almost certain to be found unconstitutional. The court's reasoning leaves little room for exceptions, setting a high bar for any future attempts at broad gun restrictions. This decision marks the beginning of a new, more absolutist era for Second Amendment law, one where the rights of law-abiding citizens to own commonly used firearms are more firmly protected than ever before. Supporters of the ruling call it a victory for constitutional rights and a correction to judicial overreach. They argue the Second Amendment protects the right to own effective, widely available firearms for self-defense, not just muskets. The AR-15, owned by millions, can't be considered unusual and thus is protected. Advocates say lower courts ignored the Supreme Court's historical test, inventing exceptions to justify bans. For them, this decision restores the Second Amendment's original meaning. Opponents warn the common use test creates a paradox. The more widespread a weapon, the harder it is to regulate. They argue AR-15s designed for combat have no place in civilian life and are used in mass shootings. Critics say the court's rigid historical standard ignores modern realities and endangers lives. The dissenting justices issued a stark warning, calling the majority's decision a grave error with deadly consequences. They argue the court abandoned the tradition of allowing legislatures to enact public safety regulations. The dissent says the common use test is a judge-made rule with no basis in the Second Amendment's text or history. They highlight the AR-15's military origins and argue it's precisely the kind of dangerous weapon historically regulated. The dissent warns this decision will invalidate laws meant to prevent mass shootings. They criticize the rigid historical test, noting the framers couldn't have foreseen modern semi-automatic rifles. The dissent calls for a flexible approach that balances self-defense rights with public safety. They predict the ruling will lead to more violence and strip states of tools to protect their citizens. The Supreme Court's ruling has immediate effects, especially on state bans of so-called assault weapons. States like Maryland will see their AR-15 bans face likely defeat, as these rifles are now constitutionally protected. The same logic applies to laws restricting large-capacity magazines, since they're standard for protected firearms. The decision also impacts the debate over gun rights for marijuana users. Federal law bans gun ownership for anyone using a controlled substance, even where marijuana is legal. Legal challenges argue this ban is unconstitutional under the new historical test. There's no clear historical tradition of disarming people for using intoxicants, making the federal ban vulnerable. High-profile cases like Hunter Biden's highlight the growing legal inconsistency. The ruling strengthens arguments that broad bans without individualized danger are unconstitutional. The ripple effect could reshape both gun and drug policy nationwide. The Supreme Court's decision hasn't unified gun laws, it's intensified the patchwork of state regulations. In permissive states, the ruling will challenge remaining restrictions. In strict states, it's thrown laws into chaos. Lawmakers in states like California and New York are scrambling to determine which laws can survive under the new test. Legal limbo reigns. Some states enforce bans while others don't, creating confusion for gun owners and law enforcement. The marijuana and gun rights issue is a prime example, with federal and state laws clashing and courts issuing contradictory rulings. This patchwork creates a catch-22 for citizens, who may face felony charges for actions legal in their state. The ruling has emboldened legal challenges, deepening divisions and fueling more litigation. For most Americans, the impact of this decision will be deeply personal, shaped by where they live, their community's values, and their own beliefs about guns and safety. The ruling doesn't just affect policy, it touches daily life, family conversations, and even how people feel about their own security. In states with strict gun laws, gun owners may soon find themselves able to purchase firearms and magazines that were previously off limits. For many, this feels like a long-awaited affirmation of their constitutional rights and a victory for personal freedom. Some will celebrate new opportunities to protect themselves and their families, but for those who have lost loved ones to gun violence or who have long advocated for stronger gun control, the ruling brings a wave of anxiety and disappointment. They worry that easier access to firearms could lead to more tragedies and see this as a setback for public safety and the progress they've fought for. The decision also introduces new legal and ethical complexities, especially for Americans who use medical marijuana and also own guns. These individuals now find themselves caught in a confusing web of state and federal laws, unsure of how to stay both healthy and law-abiding. Millions now face a difficult dilemma. Should they forego medication that helps them manage chronic pain or illness, or risk serious felony charges just to exercise their Second Amendment rights? For many, there are no easy answers, only tough choices. This ruling forces Americans to confront the ongoing tension between individual liberty and collective security. It raises questions about how much freedom is too much and what sacrifices are necessary to keep communities safe. These issues will shape conversations at dinner tables, spark debates at town halls, and influence decisions at polling places for years to come. The effects will ripple through neighborhoods, schools, and workplaces. Ultimately, this is not just a legal shift, it's a cultural moment that will shape how Americans see their rights, their government, and what safety means in their everyday lives. Legal experts agree, this ruling is the start of a new turbulent chapter. Expect a flood of lawsuits challenging remaining gun regulations, from weapon bans to red flag laws. The Supreme Court will likely have to resolve circuit splits, especially over gun rights for marijuana users. Lower courts will struggle to apply the new historical test, leading to more legal uncertainty. Some states may try innovative regulations, others may hesitate to pass new laws for fear of lawsuits. The long-term outlook, continued legal battles, deepening polarization, and a Supreme Court at the center of the gun debate. The story is far from over. The Supreme Court's decision hasn't ended the gun rights debate, it's reshaped it. By protecting modern rifles and cementing a rigid historical test, the court has drawn a new line in the sand. Gun rights advocates see a historic victory. Gun control supporters see a dangerous misstep. The ruling deepens divisions and leaves states with fewer options to address gun violence. The immediate effects will play out in courtrooms and legislatures, with ripple effects on related legal issues. The debate over firearms in America is dynamic and evolving, with the Supreme Court's voice not the last word. The future of gun rights remains unsettled, a reflection of a nation still struggling to balance liberty and security.